Thanks everyone for joining behind the PM interview. Today we'll get a glimpse of how a typical PM case interview goes, and we'll also practice it with a mock interview with Kushank. So we have two awesome speakers here, Anoki and Kushank, and thank you both of you for taking the time out to join us. I'll start off with a quick introduction to our club in case you guys are new. We are a community on campus dedicated to product management. Our goal is to kind of build this inclusive community where aspiring PMs can get together, learn more about product management, as well as learn more from each other because we have a lot to teach each other. And we kind of achieve this vision with three ways. One of them are speaker events like this one, where we get PM speakers from industry to come and talk about certain things like this is a PM interview event. We also have had events in the past talking about their PM journeys, as one of the best way to learn about product is to talk to people. Um, the second way we achieve this vision is through workshops and more, you know, practical style events, which is kind of similar to this one as well. And that's going to be our focus for next term, where you can kind of take what you learn in these speaker events and then apply them in a real life situation to kind of build out your product portfolio. And finally, we also have a Slack community, which is now 165 strong. So that is a place for everyone to, talk to each other, uh, interact, and like it's just a close knit community for you guys to learn from each other. So if you guys haven't joined yet, feel free to join. We'll drop the link sometime during this event. And yeah, that's a little bit about my spiel. I'll pass it off to Trisha and Judy, who will be my co-host for today. They are our wonderful events team members. So yeah, I'll pass it off to them.
Okay, thanks so much for that introduction, Ratchet. So yeah, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, wherever you are from. We are so excited to welcome you to UBC PMC's Behind the PM interview. So first things first, we want to make sure that this event is as interactive as possible. So we encourage that all of you to turn on your camera so that we can see your beautiful faces and say hi to each other. However, the session will be recorded. So if you aren't comfortable with that, then you don't have to do so. Okay. So before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that UBC PMC is based at the University of British Columbia, and we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation people. If you would like to learn more about native land, please visit native-land.ca. We will be sending the link in the chat box below. So anyway, we are so excited for you to be here today, possibly from all around the world. So give us some emojis and reacts to show your excitement. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Trisha, and I am one of your UBC PMC's event directors and also your host for tonight, along with Judy and Ratchet, who will be facilitating the interview later on. Okay, so without further ado, here's our agenda for tonight. So after our club president has given a wonderful introduction to our club, we will be having an introduction to our two guest speakers for tonight, Anoki and Kushank. Following that will be a 15-minute presentation about an overview of a PM interview, as well as tips and guidelines on how to approach this type of interview. And after that, we will be able to have a chance to apply what we've learned from the presentation through a live mock interview, where one of our club execs will be interviewing Kushank. And during this interview, there will also be an opportunity for the audience to have some participation, which will be explained in further detail later on. And lastly, we'll be having a Q&A for answering any remaining questions you might have for about our speakers or PM interviews or PM in general. And lastly, we'll finish off with some closing remarks. Okay, so let's start off with some a brief introduction of our two guest speakers. But before we do that, I would just like to thank Anoki and Kushank for being with us here tonight. And I would just like to ask, like, maybe how your week is going, or how are you feeling today, just to get warmed up a little. So yeah, anyone can talk.
Kushank, you want to go first?
Sure.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all from wherever you're tuning in. It's so nice to see that people from like different places are joining in. Right now, I'm in India as well. I'm not in Vancouver. Just flew here like last week. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here. My week has been just kind of getting over the jet lag. But yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. Hopefully, we can add some value.
Likewise. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us. This is such a refreshing part of my week because I've been in like a project bubble working on something. So it's nice to see like a student energy, and it brings me back nostalgia to like all the things that were going on when I was in school and like the after school activities and things like that. So this is awesome. Really great initiative. I'm really excited to share my 2 cents based on my journey. Certainly not an expert in all realms, but I'm hoping that what Kushank and I can share helps someone out in some way in their interview journey.
All right, perfect. I bet a lot of our students here today are really excited to hear what you guys have in store for them. So yeah, why don't we move on to some introductions, and perhaps we can start off with Anoki first. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us about your story, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everyone, Anoki. I guess I'll skip the slide about my intro when I do present, but I'm from Toronto, local to Toronto, grew up here my whole life. Went to school here as well. I did an undergrad in business, general BBA degree at Schulich at York University. After my undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to specialize in, so I did a general degree and then did a rotational program at Bell, which is the telco. And I did a couple rotations in marketing, retention, churn analytics, et cetera, and landed in product management after the fact. I landed in AI ML space and really loved it. So I pursued it further in an automation space after that. And more recently, I've pivoted to more of a consulting role. And I'm a senior product manager at a company called The Working Group. It's essentially a software consulting firm that does everything from ideation to research, design, engineering, and I lead projects from different industries right now working in the fitness space. And yeah, I've been through a few product interviews, so I'm happy to share anything that I've learned that may help you guys along the way.
All right, sounds good. I guess we can move on to Kushank also. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, so I went to school at Simon Fraser. I got my degree in engineering, and then I worked as a project manager at SAP. At that point, I kind of realized like I kind of want to go in more like consulting side. I wanted to be a bit more client-facing rather than just work on internal projects in a big organization. Where I can really make an impact, or at least I see the impact that I'm making. And I got an opportunity to work as a technology consultant for a Richmond redevelopment project. That was quite cool because working on a big project that's going to have massive impact on everybody's lives in DC. That was quite interesting. And then I like to move around a bit just because at this stage of my career I want to experiment a bit more. And then I started working as a product consultant for freelancer.com, where I've been working with various startups and Fortune 500 companies. Like kind of going all the way from conceptualization, ideation, validating the product, and launching the MVPs. And then from there on, if like the product is a success or not, you kind of like take the next steps forward. But it's a really exciting space to be in just because I get to work with lots of products at the same time, lots of quick validation. And, in a way, like I'm kind of working on multiple startups simultaneously. So, a lot of them are going to fail, but I'm hoping a couple of them will make it to the big leagues. Alongside that, I have my own consultancy as well, where I do some workflow automation consultancy. So that's something that's relatively new, but I'm hoping to grow that out this year as well. I'm hoping to share my experience as well, just kind of like how I think through like design process, just because I've like for the past couple of years I've done that a lot. So hopefully you'll find that useful. And again, at any point, feel free to ask me questions, and also challenge me. I love being challenged, of course, because I'm not expert in any means. I just have a bit more experience. Then yeah, like just because being in the industry for like a couple of years or so.
Okay, yeah, sounds perfect. I hope you feel challenged during our mock interview today, Kushank. But yeah, it sounds like you guys both have like
that.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it sounds like both of you have a lot of diverse experiences, and I guess we can talk a lot about that. And so yeah, thank you for your introductions. Now, before we jump into the live PM interview, let's have a brief overview of how this type of interview takes place, as well as how to approach this kind of interview. So this presentation will be presented to us by Anoki. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please leave them down below in the chat. And so, yeah, I will then pass it off to Anoki to share her screen as well.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know if the tech's working here and all is good. Does that work for everyone? Yeah, okay, yeah. Awesome. I'm going to play my slideshow. Awesome. Hey, everyone. Already did an intro, so I'm going to skip over this. I think before I share the overview of the case interview, I just wanted to take like a quick moment to address product and everything we think about when we think about product, because I often find a lot of folks asking me, how do I break into product? How does that interview happen? And how do I actually prepare for that interview? And we'll hone in a little bit more on just a general overview of product interviews. But I thought this was a funny comic to represent it, because oftentimes product managers have to wear so many hats. You're wearing the design hat, you're wearing the ROI/cost benefit analysis/finance hat on making sure this all makes sense in the end and it's actually strategic. You're playing the bird's eye view lens, and you're playing also like the teamwork, making the team happen, bringing the team together. And there's a ton of inspiration and leadership that product people have to bring to the table to essentially build the right product. So I thought this was something interesting to share. And I think this hones in a lot on why product managers are hired for certain skills over others. And I'm looking forward to highlighting what those skills are and some key things that I've found useful thinking about when I'm framing up my answers to the product questions that come up during the case round. Something funny that often happens is you have this giant list of features and you just want to put everything on the table. But what's essential to think about is, are we actually designing for the user? And is the user who we're thinking about when we're actually creating that list of features for that MVP and that first round of iterations and things like that? So as we go through this presentation, I encourage you folks to think about your own answers to the questions that are being asked, the frameworks that are being suggested, and how are you going to make it user-centric? How are you going to think about that customer, and how are you going to think about the needs and the pain points of that customer? Because essentially anything that you're building, B2B or B2C, comes down to whether or not that customer is actually going to use it and like it and want to use it again and come back for it. So essentially, when hiring, I've hired a few for my team, and I've also gone through many interview processes. And really, to think about the hat of a product manager, you want to think about it from an enabling standpoint. Product managers are really the value stream managers as well as creators to the end customer. So we think about the business goal and the strategy and a particular need that the customer or the company has identified. And you're essentially channeling your hats of how do I create the best product, but also how do I enable my team to help create the best product and champion all of the things that those folks bring to the table to enable those functions to essentially fill the gap that that need may have possessed or shown to the company or yourself. So I really like this little visual because it shows a lot about how we're on the outside of the functions, and product is one function, but often it tends to collaborate with the value stream that helps get us to that end customer. Which leads us to think about what exactly our product managers sought for, and what are the skills that managers look for when they're hiring. And I think these 9 skills are something that I've probably been going through for years of interviewing on how to frame up my answer. How do I actually think about the different frameworks that those managers are looking for, and a succinct way to answer the questions that may be centric to a particular goal that that manager is looking to seek that that candidate possesses. So we'll go through these 9 and I'll briefly overview them. Number 1 being thinking about the customer first always and being user-centric. Intuition is one way to make a product, but often that doesn't solve the issue that you may have at hand. So always going straight to the user and learning more about them and their behaviors is the first way to go about it. Goals and metrics focused. Can you identify how success will be measured? What does success look like? And have the ability to answer questions with that hat, so that in the end you are tying everything back to customer need, but also business need and business strategy. Data-driven decision-making. There could be tons of seminars on this alone, but there's tons of tools out there that equip managers now to suggest tools on a data standpoint that help us measure success and actually drive better product decision-making, so that we are making features and MVPs based on sound, accurate data. Innovation, the ability to be creative in your solutioning and think about what exactly am I designing for and how can we creatively and innovatively solve these pain points and challenges that we identify in the user, and how outside the box can we think about ways that better an experience or better the user standpoint, which leads a little bit into number 5, which is design and user experience. We often, as product managers, work very closely with design, and design is a key component to visualizing and making your idea come to life. And often what we have to do is put on hats of better user experience through visual design, experience design, functional design, utilitarian design. So lots of different hats to put on there when you're designing for something. Technical acumen. This can take in various shapes. When you're first starting out as a product manager, it is something that you learn on the job. I've found degrees are great and they're a great foundation, but I think on the job helps you apply all the theories you may learn, and working with engineering or having an engineering degree is certainly a skill set that folks vie for and are always looking to see how we can make better sustainable decisions when we're thinking about infrastructure and architecture when making the products that we're building. Leadership and vision, so influence, the ability to influence those around you, particularly the value stream folks we're talking about, the folks that actually make the product happen and bring it to life, being able to communicate that vision. Think about the 2-year roadmap, but then also the 5-month roadmap, and thinking about how those bridge together in a seamless fashion, and how do we build on the MVP in an iterative way, and what are the bridging points to actually bring to an MVP 2 and an MVP 3, and how do we do it in an efficient, scalable manner. Communication, very key, but this is more of a general one as well. I think product managers or not, this is something that we always hope to be better at when we're out in the workforce as we work with different teams and move on to different roles. And then execution, this is super key. The ability to actually be super up high on the strategy end and think about the vision, but then actually manage the design deliverables, the engineering deliverables, run agile sprints, agile methodologies, waterfall and agile hybrid methodologies. There's tons of frameworks out there that set us up for success when actually working in various scenarios. So being able to communicate those in the interview is definitely a plus, and being able to leverage things from your pocket based on the questions coming your way is also a great way to be prepared for the interview with research and have something prepared up hand rather than being on your feet, and also being able to show that you've delivered something or have knowledge about something that you look forward to executing on. So the interview itself, there's tons of questions you may encounter, types of case interviews, and they really differ based on the type of product role that you may be going for. There's a very technical product role where you may be managing complex architecture, complex infrastructure, actually working on the back end of a product or the user interface, which is the front end of the product, but more specifically on the physical engineering end. There could also be a growth data standpoint where you're actually working on scaling a product and you're working in a very different realm than when you are in a technical realm. You could be a data product manager where you're heavy on honing in on KPIs and metrics and setting up North Stars for the company as well as the product and its roadmap. And then you've got a general product manager as well, who may be more of trying to hop in and out of different things, or you're managing one product end to end in all facets. So this is like a list of 10 things that you may come across in a broad fashion, certainly not the end all be all list, but this is pulled from one of a really great book that I've read. It's called Cracking the PM Interview, and I'm sure it's like the first thing that comes up when you Google how to prepare for a product interview. So highly suggest it if you are interested in learning more about tactics to conquer the interview. And so I'll briefly brush over this because I know we're timing out here. But essentially, design, I know that's the mock interview today, so I won't go into that too much, but the ability to design a product, the ability to, going back to our hat of what managers look for, go-to market strategy, so execution. How are you going to take something to market? What's your rollout plan look like? How are you going to achieve that rollout plan? What are the tactics set out to help you achieve the go-to market launch? How are you going to enter a market? If it's a complete new blue ocean strategy for a company and they're going into a new market they've never gone into, they often look to the product manager to understand what we call product market fit, which is a term that we often talk about when we're thinking about positioning, which often comes in hand with marketing as well. Pricing, its own economic strategy as well. You could go into many pricing models, but you could also be as high level as, what do subscription models look like? What are pricing models out there? How are companies digitally adopting those pricing models to be better or smarter about how they engage their customers' wallet? Brainstorming, so more on the strategy side. Super high level, maybe you're strategizing about the 5-year roadmap of a product or the 3-year roadmap of a product, and you're just thinking about, how do I actually integrate myself into that industry as a company? Guesstimate, certainly no alien to a lot of university interviews I had, which is like the market sizing questions. These really differ. I haven't really encountered much in product specific interviews, but I certainly do see them in consulting interviews. Metrics and KPIs, so really honing in on how exactly you are going to put a time and an objective to the results that you want to drive. So things like how is the retention rate for a customer? How is a product dipped by X% in subscription price per customer? Facebook's, I know I was reading the other day, was something along the lines of how many friends has one person referred in 10 days, and their goal was, can we get that person to refer 7 friends in 10 days? So that's more of a referral and sign-on strategy for their KPI. So things like that. Strategy, super key. I think strategy comes in all realms of any product interview. And I think it's a hat that anybody working on a product, whether you're a product manager or not, needs to play. Tech cases, often this comes in rounds with technical assessments. And if you're working on anything tech related, like tech product management, tech consulting, tons of questions here on, what does your tech stack look like? Can you walk me through how Instagram houses their data? What's the data structure look like for this? How would you do it? What's the cloud infrastructure on this? Is that what you would leverage? Things like that. And then market trend, this really tends to hone in on, are you reading about things in the market? What are you interested in? How do you follow trends? What do you read? What do you watch? And what are you keeping up with? And why are you keeping up with those things? And how does that sort of make you tick? And what's your passion? And I think that usually comes out in a lot of the ways we build the product. How am I doing on time here? I have a couple more slides, but I'll try to breeze through if I don't have time.
I think we're good. Yeah, you can just take a couple more.
Okay, sounds good. I wanted to share just a couple strategies that have helped me along the way when tackling these types of questions. An example is always sticking in the back of my mind, is particularly when you get nervous on the spot when you're in a case interview. Something I like to do is, am I answering the why? Did I answer the question? Is it the why? And the why really comes down to, why am I building this product? What is the need for this product? And it all goes back to the user. And bringing it back to the user always makes it a little bit more sound, because it's something that you're not just justifying via gut or intuition, or particularly when it's like a hypothesis that a lot of the company may have. And how you get to that why is a interviewer asks a question, you want to clarify the goal. So the goal is to, could be anything. It could be you want to grow revenue on a monthly basis per user. You want to grow subscription volume on a monthly basis overall for the company, whatever that goal is. State your approach. So pick a framework that you want to use. Sometimes when it's more general, like behavioral interviews, you'll use like STARS as your framework. For product, you can use like the circles method. There's various methods that you can use out there that you can Google as well. Use that framework, analyze it with the question, come up with a recommendation, always have an answer, have an opinion, have an answer. Oftentimes people get lost in the explanation. Oh, sorry, my Siri went off. Recommend something and then always summarize your recommendation. Make sure that you're able to be succinct and that you can make a recommendation at the end of the answer without getting lost in rambling. So a couple example frameworks. This is a framework that I actually learned from a YouTube video I watched at one point when I was prepping for a product interview, and I've actually had it back pocket in many client meetings and I've loved it. It's essentially going by question and walking anybody through, the interviewer through or somebody you're working with through the end to end of the product itself. So your customer need, what is the customer saying? How are they challenged today? What are their pain points? Does the data support what they're saying? Are a lot of customers experiencing that as well? Which problems do you want to tackle? Asking that back to the interviewer can also show a lot of acumen in you wanting to converse and having that back and forth dialogue. And understanding what exactly is the problem. And there may be 12. They may have a list of them. Pick one and choose one and then run with it as like the way that you want to apply the framework. Identifying the objective of the product, feature that would solve that problem. And the key here is always tying it back to the customer and then always tying it back to the objective. So the objective of your product should be related to a problem the customer is facing or some customer need. And then the feature that you're trying to solve that problem with should then go back to the objective that you're essentially trying to set up, like grow your revenue or grow your customer base. And what is that feature going to do to help grow that customer base or help grow that revenue per user and whatever it might be. So the key is tying it all back so that the logic flows through from question to question. What are the key results you want to accomplish? So bringing back those success metrics and key KPIs. And then how exactly you're going to iterate and measure that success. So you want to make sure that you tie it back to the feature, which ties back to the objective, which ties back to the problem statement. And if you're able to, in a very succinct and clear manner, able to communicate this, it's usually a win-win strategy on the answer side. Very similar, this is the CIRCLES framework. CIRCLES is the acronym here. And it's the same concept. It's essentially identifying your situation, then what your customer is and who they are, what are their needs, how are you going to prioritize your feature list, and why are you going to select certain features over others? What solutions can you think of that solve for those features as well as the roadmap needs for that product? And then evaluating your trade-offs. So thinking about why am I going to put something in my MVP and why is something going to go later on in my iteration phase, and how do you justify that? What are the frameworks and decisions you make to help justify that? And then in the end, of course, summarizing it all in a nice bow to make sure that the why is answered back to that person that's listening to the answer or the person you're working with. Some tips and tricks. These are very general, but also things that you also want to be mindful of specifically when giving really heavy answers, because cases can get very technical and very long-winded in your answers that you may give. So having a conversation and a dialogue with the interviewer often breaks up a little bit of the rambling, as well as maybe thought process that you may be going through and then getting scrambly because, oh, I'm now nervous, I'm on the spot, I forgot what I was talking about. Having that conversation helps you bring it all back and not be so nervous about it. Being personable and friendly. They're human at the end of the day. I've been so nervous in interviews before. It's very human. You want the job, you're really excited about it. But understanding that that person interviewing you is also a person, and they've got a ton of other things going on outside of that interview. So asking about how they're doing, asking about how their day's going, can also break up a little bit of the awkwardness that also comes with interviews. And it's also a way to just show that you can communicate, lead a meeting, lead some communication skills in and out and weave into the weeds, but also outside of it. Asking for follow-up questions. It's okay to actually articulate that, can I clarify that a little bit further? Can I get a little bit more detail on that question? I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. Is this what exactly you were meant to share, and that's how I'm interpreting it? Those actually show that you're able to articulate clearly and are able to understand the ask really well. Doing your research on the culture, also very bonus, because it helps you understand how to lead with intention. Some folks are very results driven, getting to the point. Other folks like to think more about, how is the team going to be involved? Is it a people-centric culture, etc. Customers' needs, I think I've done that one enough, so you know that one. Preparing really thoughtful questions in advance, so thinking about what you want to get out of that interview and actually understand about the company and whether or not it's a fit for you as well. Don't talk disparagingly of a former company. It can be easy to, when you're asked, like, when were you in a situation where you failed, or describe a team member that was challenging to work with. There's some questions in there they throw you during the case round that may tempt you to, but stay professional and give your answers as best as possible without really giving out folks under the radar. Research who we're meeting with, that's a given. I think you guys are very well versed with that one. And advocate for yourself. I think a lot of folks get nervous and are like, I think I'm a good fit for the role. I think you'll like this, but show up with intention. You've prepared. You've done a ton of framework research. You've done a ton of prep. So believe in the prep, believe in yourself, and keep practicing it. For me, just doing rehearsals by typing Google Docs answers and then talking them over and how I would use those scenarios really helped understand that, okay, I have a back pocket example I can always leverage when I can not think on my feet. And then leverage your resources. There's tons of great books out there. These are just two, Cracking the PM Interview and Decode and Conquer. But there's courses out there as well, BrainStation, Product Faculty, Product School, and then YouTube, Product Interview Case rounds. And I've watched like tons of those videos to prep for any PM interview that I've had as well. And then there's tons of great writers on Medium if you're looking for some good reads on just PM generally and journeys for PMs generally. And that is everything that I had to share. So I hope that wasn't much of a ramble. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Noki, for that really amazing presentation. So the audience, if you guys have any questions, now's the time to raise your hand and unmute. There's no questions in the chat, or you can also type them in the chat. But because we are running a bit short on time, so if there's no questions, then we're just going to be moving on to the next section, if that's all right. Okay. So
actually,
the next section.
I wanted to quickly ask a quick one, since there were no questions. Just curious on your thoughts of like over adjusting to a framework, and like, I guess, how do you strike the balance between not being like, oh, we do have a question, but anyway, how do you strike the balance between not, you know, sticking to the framework too much and sounding too robotic versus just like being a bit more free flowing? I think that's something that crossed my.
Yeah, great question. So it depends. So I know that is like the worst answer ever. It depends, but I will elaborate. The first thing is to really think about the question itself and what is that question trying to evaluate. So if you put yourself in the interviewer's shoes, there's a lot of standard case interview questions that you'll receive, case interview questions that go directly to like product thinking and assessing or evaluating or contributing to some form of a recommendation. Those tend to really think around, can this person think in the craft? Are you craft oriented, and have you done on the job work, or perhaps in positions where you're first interviewing for your first role, outside internships? It's what can you apply as a skill that's transferable to this scenario? And let's say you were given the job and you were actually on the job solving that problem right now. What would you do and how would you do it? Those are very framework oriented questions because they're looking for your approach and style. Sometimes they tend to be, tell me how you would go about doing this. That really, like the language of the question often alludes to the how and the why you would do something. When language alludes to those types of arenas, I would say stick to things that you know. Doesn't always have to be a framework, but as long as you can stick to a very logical sequencing of answers, i.e., why did I do something? Here's how the context and situation was lined up for me. Here's how I went about discovering my answer, and here's my answer. I think even that shows them that at least you can think on your feet and have a logic to how you approach that when you don't have a framework handy. But yeah, I certainly agree that sometimes you have to adjust to just like a human answer of, I didn't know what I was doing and here's how I found out how to do it, is also a very personable approach to answering those types of questions. But certainly frameworks aren't always the answer. It tends to be dependent on the question being asked.
Awesome. Thanks.
Oh, right. I'll continue. Right. Because we are running a bit short on time, we will get to the questions in the chat at the end of the mock interview. So we will be moving on to the mock interview directly. So Ratchet, our club president, will be acting as the interviewer and posing a mock interview question to Kushank. And during the interview, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be pausing after each section to answer them. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. I guess, yeah, we'll get into like a interview, Kushank. So I guess welcome to the interview. Today, we're going to be going over a product design question. So just so everyone knows, similar to what Noki talked about in her presentation. So this is a typical product case question. And the question is, design a product for drivers in rush hour. So Kushank, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Let's get started. So first off, for every interview, for every case question, the first step you would want to do is to ask clarifying questions. The reason for that is, they're giving you just a basic overall idea, and you can't really like come up with a solution or even a problem statement if you have something super broad. So you want to kind of like hone in and what specifics they're looking for, or even also like an interviewer, they want to know how you're thinking. Like, they want to see you apply a bit of critical skills. So they want you to ask, give you questions. So we'll get started. So Rajat, can you explain me, like, can you define what's a rush hour to you? Because, definitions could be different to different people. I want to know what I'm working with.
Yeah, for sure. So rush hour could be defined as the hours leading up to the workday. So like between 8 to 10 a.m. and after the workday, like 5 to 7 p.m.
Okay. So I'm assuming, again, I'm just going to throw out a few assumptions here, just because, you want to ask a few clarifying questions. Also, you want to like throw out a few assumptions that you're going to like, use to build up your answer or your case study after. So I'm just going to say that I'm assuming, the geography we're looking for is just like North America. Most people here are like right now in North America. So let's stick with that as our geography. Another assumption here is like, is it something pre-COVID or post-COVID? Just because our way of lives have changed like significantly since last year. I'm assuming, let's just say, I will kind of like, we'll use this case for post-COVID days, because, that's what most of us will be able to relate to moving forward. And then what do you think is like the average time that we're assuming, the time for the commute? Rachit, do you want to expand on that a bit?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked. We're looking based on like some data that we have collected. We're looking to target users with an average drive time of 45 minutes to 1 hour.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And the other thing I would love to know is what specific users are we looking for? There could be different types of users. You're commuting in the rush hour. It could be white collar professionals, blue collar professionals, parents driving their kids to school, bus drivers. it's busy for them as well. The bus schedule is quite rigorous in the morning or evenings as well. Or is it somebody like, could be somebody else? Just for the case of like, sake of this interview, I would assume it's the white collar professionals, like, people who are working in tech industry, banking, or just, white collar professionals driving to work from suburban areas or other parts of like, Metro Vancouver, for example, to downtown where most of the offices are, or the other way around. Another few assumptions I would want to add here are, like the cars have smartphone connectivity. I'm assuming, we're looking for Google as a product, so I want to make sure there is a smartphone connectivity. And then no hardware really, because, hardware does add a bit more challenge. So we'll assume here that there is no hardware involved. We're just gonna like use purely like the cell phone connectivity to the car. And then another question would be, are we looking for users driving to work or from work? Just because their goals and needs might be different in those two scenarios. And then, what do you think is the Google's vision right now? Because that would help us answer that question a bit.
Yeah, and just to quickly add that we are assuming that Kushank is a Google PM, and that's why we're thinking from the perspective of Google as a company. And yeah, let's kind of take the case where people are going to work. We want to design a solution where we try to make them like happy when they're commuting in rush hour traffic to work.
Okay. Again, I'm talking a bit informally. I'm just talking not as in like, mock interview. I'm just kind of like giving a bit overview as well, how I'm thinking. So we have talked about, like asking for clarification questions. I've laid out my assumptions, and now we kind of dive a bit more into the problem space. Most of the time we want to spend in clarifying the problem because that's more important than the solution space. Every PM would say that, it's really, really important to hone the problem, because if you're not solving the right problem, your solution is not going to work at all. So again, another thing I want to mention here is that usually, when you are trying to define problem space, you will be talking to like a lot of customers. Once you have identified the users, like we have already. Since it's an interview, we wouldn't really be, doing any customer interviews. So I'll just make assumptions here as well. So just, for problem space. So I'll say, I'm assuming, drivers are frustrated because it takes too long. They cannot really use their time like efficiently, just because they're stuck in traffic. Rush hour traffic could be frustrating. That could lead to like, negative emotions to set the tone of the day. They could be frustrated, where to park. They might be running late for the meetings. Like if you have a morning 9 a.m. stand up and you're stuck in rush traffic, like, just taking a while. If you're trying to like, get some entertainment, like tune into radio, it's usually like blasting ads, just because radio knows as well. That's most people would be listening into the radio. So like, I feel like these are like the few problems I would assume people who are trying to drive to work are kind of like facing day in, day out. I mean, based on the problems, it seems like the bottom line is just pretty much efficient use of time. If I want to summarize, all the problems into like more fundamental problem, that more than that meets the eye, it seems like the efficient use of time. So that's where I would sort of like define my problem space right now. Efficient use of time is what we're trying to like help people with as they're trying to drive to work.
That sounds like a good goal. Cool. So I think now that we've gone through like, I guess the initial setup, we can pause a bit for maybe questions, or Anoki, if you have thoughts.
I don't yet. This is great.
Awesome. Anybody else? Like, do you guys feel like, drivers could have other problems when commuting to work? Feel free to. So we have one question in the chat.
I could read that out. So typically for these questions, in your opinion, how much time are answers expected to be? For example, answer breakdown, assumption, thorough assumption, 1 minute, summarize, 2 minute, etc. is like a brief time period.
It's kind of hard to comment on the exact time, just because when you're talking, you wouldn't really have access to like, a timer in any way. I would say, I think something like along the lines what Anoki mentioned earlier, if you are feeling like you're rambling a bit more, or you're kind of like, losing track of your thoughts, just like have the interviewer engaged in the conversation as well. but ideally, I mean, you don't want to be like super short because you also want to like, kind of like explain how you're thinking. Because again, what they're looking for is not like the problem you're identifying, the solutions you're working with. They're looking for how you're thinking through the solutions. As long as you're still like, actively not going around in circles, as long as you still have more thoughts you want to convey, you can, just kind of like talk about it. Again, it's just like, you don't want to spend 20 minutes, even if you have like great ideas, you're still like kind of diving into the problem. That might be a bit too long, and most likely the interviewer will kind of like stop you and like ask you to move forward. I mean, there's no like number I would quote, just whatever would feel right based on the interview time as well. If it's like, yeah, I don't know. And okay, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't add so much on like the timing front. I think you nailed the answer on that one. I think it's more, here's like, I'll go back to a question that was asked earlier on how do you adjust for frameworks? I think this is a perfect opportunity to adjust a framework that is to your comfort level. It doesn't have to be like the standard, walk me through like everything a product manager should know. It really is what you feel comfortable walking through the logic for. And as long as your thinking is critical and it's sound and it follows a sequence, I always think about it as a sequence of like, how did you get from point A to Z? And what was that sequence? And as long as that sequence makes sense, that framework that you apply is totally adjustable from the, how does the data support the problems that we've identified so far? Is that what you see in the data, to not even going the data route? You can go the, is this something you're investigating as a business strategy? Is this a goal for you? Does this match your monthly revenue / metrics / KPIs? And how are you targeting for why you want to do this amongst all these other goals that you may have? And how high does this rank in your goals and objectives and things like that? So you can take it in so many directions. So depending on the direction you go to, you can make it a conversation as well.
There's another question in chat from Priyanka, wondering about sometimes we would be given a time take home case review where we would need to enhance existing feature in case of a web app or a mobile app. Is it recommended to talk verbally, or should we create wireframes, mockups to better present our idea? In this case, I'd say ask for clarification. Ask them what's the deliverable they're looking for. It really depends what they're looking for, and then it could be either or it could be something completely different, and then just go from there. I think there's another question here as well. Does the quality of the solution matter more than the framework used to answer, or vice versa? In my opinion, it's not the quality of the solution matters, or if you're using a framework or not as well. I think one of you has mentioned as well. It's just like how you're thinking. Like they want to see you putting on like the product management hat, thinking through like from user's perspective and tying it back to the objective. It's just like how you're thinking. You're thinking like logically, critically, and then you're able to really comprehend what's the ask, rather than kind of like getting into like, oh, must use proper frameworks, because these frameworks aren't like laws of physics. It's just like people created that works better for them. As a PM, like different PMs have their own frameworks. It's just not published and people don't know. But whatever works for you based on your audience, if you are in an agency or working with different clients and customers, you would use different frameworks for different approaches. But if you are like, a B2B or B2C product, within a company, you would have some frameworks laid out by your company and stuff, like from senior PMs. And then you might just kind of use those because that would align with the goal and the direction the company usually takes. But again, that's not relevant to the interview. For interview, it's just like how you're kind of like thinking through the case.
Cool. Okay, I think we are running a bit short on time, so let's kind of move on with the rest of the interview, and we'll address the remaining questions at the end, or at the next section. Okay, so Prashant, do you want to?
Okay, so we have sort of identified a problem here, which is like, we want white collar people living in North America as they commute to work to effectively use their time. So I guess now we just kind of have to brainstorm a few ways, how they could use their time. Big picture, like, it's just like, they might be seeking for entertainment. We could have a curated list of like their tweets or headlines or podcasts that could be played. while they're commuting. It could be, I don't know, like something people hate doing, like maybe doing chores. For example, like, let's say ordering groceries, like getting coffee delivered to work based on where you at, your location, that could work. Or perhaps another idea could be task automation. For example, let's say, you can ask some Google Assistant to read out an emails for you, and, you can trigger some tasks like budget approval, or notifying your manager that you'll be running late, or notifying the team you're running late for the meeting, or dialing into the meeting, just kind of like task automation. What else could you do while in your car, while you're driving to work in the morning? This is open to floor as well, like solution space. So we're all just brainstorming here. If anybody wants to chime in and add any like ideas. Again, during this stage of the interview, like, you're pretty much just kind of like brainstorming what you think from user perspective. Like put yourself, or try to put yourself in the shoes of the user. Just like, imagine you are in the car driving to work, or even like imagine you are in the car or like driving to the interview. How would you have used that time better in this scenario, of course? And then any other solutions coming to anyone else's mind?
I have one that it's probably a cheat because I've had this problem before and had to come up with an answer in my old job, but something that we often encountered was parents with kids went over in their data usage in the car because their commute was long, or during traffic, particularly during rush hour, the only thing to keep their kids occupied was devices. And so their data usage in devices for cars was always higher when we looked at when are your kids using your devices the most? It was always during rush hour. And so a solution we came up with for that was, how do we design Wi-Fi for the car? And how do we provide a hotspot add-on to your current mobile device / attach it to your car? In the Google sense, this can be like a dynamic pricing of some kind, where you disable cellular services for like connected devices or something like that, so that you like download something offline and then you can't access it via cellular or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, so usually during the interview, once you have like laid out 2 or 3 solutions, they could be completely absurd. It doesn't have to be something practical. Again, you just want to be like thinking out loud, just, being innovative, creative, like thinking out of the box, like using your craft. And then once you have laid out like couple or like maybe more, however, how many you can come up with, just in the first few minutes or so, then you kind of like tie it back to the problem and start prioritizing, which one do you think would work better? Since here we're looking at, white collar professionals. So like, let's just summarize the 3 or 4 we've talked about. So one is for like, parents like with kids and, like using their data. The other one is like just having some sort of entertainment in the car. The other one is doing some chores or some workflow, like some task automation at work. So looking at the one that Anoki mentioned here for the, parents with kids. So this is the user segment we ignored for this case scenario. So we wouldn't be prioritizing that one for the rest of our case. Like entertainment, you could see there's a lot of alternatives in the market. You could have like your Spotify playlist going on, or, just go to like AM station of radio. We can have the latest news and stuff. So I wonder what, like, maybe this is not the best to invest in. One more we talked about was task automation with Google. So, perhaps we could use Google App Engine, and then we could run those, task automations for the people. So once they get to work, they already set to work, like some of the tasks they, would take up of their time during the day have already been taken care of. So they get that head start at work even while they're stuck in traffic. So in this case, just assuming, they're a white collar worker, this would help them, like get on work, and then have, structure the day a bit better once they're at work. I would assume this is the solution I would want to go for. Yeah, and then in terms of like, Google as a company, this could really tie well into their, Google enterprise offerings. That way, they could compete better with Office 365, which is still a market leader for a lot of the companies. The next thing would be, let's talk about some of the features that we would have for this solution that we've just talked about. Again, so far we talked about just like an overall like big picture solution, but we haven't really dived deeper into it. And now we're just talking about like a few features, how we would implement it, or which features need to be implemented for having like some basic functional version of this solution ready to be used. So as a Google user, you could trigger automated workflows using Google Voice Assistant, so that you can save some time while you're at work. Or as a Google, like that's one feature. The other feature could be as a Google Enterprise user, you could send email responses using Google Voice Assistant. So you can respond to emails hands-free. And another solution could be, or another feature could be, help me think here, guys. How else we could use automation for people to like help being productive at work while they're not at work?
I think one thing would be helpful, I know for me when I used to drive, was if I'm not going to make it into the office on the clock that the meeting starts, the ability for me to reschedule that meeting via voice assistant. Because I can't go into my calendar while I'm driving and move it if I'm the host. So the ability to reschedule, I know iOS does not do this, but I always wished that it would exist so that I can schedule a meeting.
Yeah, some of the comments here in the chat as well are related to rescheduling meetings. Seems like everybody wants that.
Yeah.
So okay, after our solution space, we kind of like talk a bit more about features. How you would kind of boil it down, like break it down, like big overall solution into a few features that can be communicated to the engineering team, so you can kind of like start doing the estimations and looking at the overall architecture and how it kind of like works together with the technical aspects of the product. We also want to address a few like pitfalls or like things that could go wrong, or pretty much like things that would make this project not successful. A few things could be like stakeholders approval, just because here we are using Google platform, and then we are integrating with Google Cloud platform and also Google Voice Assistant. So it would be quite critical for us to get approval from all the stakeholders involved with those teams to start working on this project. And I think could be, like another risk we're mentioning here, like we're taking here, is that we're only catering to Google Enterprise users. And again, that kind of ties back to our initial user segment we identified, which is, like white collar workers. But it does alienate, Microsoft people. So like companies who are using Microsoft Suite, they wouldn't be able to use the solution. So this will be strictly for the Google Enterprise users. Another roadblock for the success could be, it requires upfront configuration, to set up all this automation. Even using like low code or no code solutions, it could still require some time to set up. So that would potentially like, hurt user adoption, but that could be mitigated using like, a few templated solutions like, Power Platform for Microsoft does like lots of use cases they've already identified, and they have created some of like the templates that could be easily used and customized. And also, another thing is just like, product validation. So right now we're just thinking hypothetically that, this is a key problem. A good idea is like a good framework, not a framework, but it's like an analogy you can use, like painkillers versus vitamin. They also talk about during the interview, like, is this a painkiller or is it a vitamin? So vitamin is something, you just take because it's like a nice to have, like, you take vitamin C just because, if you don't take it, it's not going to hurt you. You just choose to take it to better your health. However, painkiller is something you would want to take just because you have no choice. Like you have to take painkiller to really alleviate your pain. So that's something critical to identify as well, that the problem you have identified, is that a painkiller or is that a vitamin? So far now we have identified, who our users are, what the problem was, a few solutions. We have prioritized solutions. We have laid out a few features for the solutions, and we have mentioned a few risks for the implementation as well. And then final thing for the product design would be like, few things to like few tactics for go-to-market. How would we roll out this feature? Since, again, you just have to like pause for a bit, just to kind of think. Don't try to like just speak all the time. It's super important, or I mean, it doesn't hurt if you want to like pause and like take a moment to like, just recollect your thoughts and then really think through what you're going to say. So for go-to-market, let's say this is going to be a Google Enterprise product. So one way could be to put this as an offering in Google Enterprise Bundle already, and have the sales team pitch it to even prospect as well, to help their all the people using Google Enterprise to use this product as they commute to work and stuff, to start driving adoption. And of course, you would also you want to mention that another good thing to do is to have that feedback loop from the users. Once you're building a new product, you also want to make sure you have the feedback loop built as well, so you can collect feedback from the users. That way you can iterate quickly over the product, you can validate quickly, and you can grow the product and scale in a more efficient way. Another thing you want to I guess we've talked about is customizing templates to drive adoption. I think that would also probably fall under go-to-market, just because that would help us take to the market and drive that adoption that we're looking for at the early stage for a new product. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions? Again, I kind of went. Yeah.
Sorry, there was one question from Stephanie, and she talked about, I guess a bit earlier we discussed about user segmentation, right? So do you need to come up with multiple ideas for multiple user segments, or would you just focus on one user segment and brainstorm for that? What's the recommendation there?
For the interview, you would just want to assume one you would feel comfortable with. Again, just whatever you feel comfortable with at that time of the interview. Pick one and just go for it. The reason is, with the broad problem statement or broad case study, you could really go into 20 different directions, and that's probably going to confuse you and the interviewer. So you would want to pick one and stick to it. And the reason is, it just boils down to they want to see how you think, not necessarily what solution that you come up with.
I think this is also a really great question to use data for. So for example, you could leverage a lot of conversation here to say, the framework doesn't have to follow one order, but you can certainly pull up questions, or even just general curiosity on product thinking side and critical thinking side. What is your largest segment? What I would hope or assume that the segments that use this product are parents, white collar, kids, whoever it might be, whatever the app is, and then identify some conversation on who tends to be your largest segment. What does your pie chart look like? And then you can also have conversation on, is your goal to grow that segment via dollars? Is your goal to diversify into a new segment? Is your goal to generate more engagement with the same user that's using and then that goal can help you identify, okay, given your goal, let's go with this segment. And that can also then set you up for a ton of other answers later on that the interviewer may actually give you, i.e. what your key metrics might be, what your KPIs might be, and how you will measure those. The interviewer may actually tell you if you ask for some data points.
And another thing I actually wanted to add is it's very good to often tie back to the goal that you establish in the beginning. So let's say your goal is to maybe Google wants to increase engagement with their enterprise services. That could have been a goal for this question. And then we could say the reason we chose the white collar user segment was because we wanted to focus and really drill down on the enterprise segment of the customer. And we felt like there was, you can always have that conversation with the interviewer and kind of define your goal before you start. And then I guess a good practice is to also tie back whatever you come up with to those goals. But that's something that has helped me also personally when deciding what user segment to pick. Cool. Kushank, is there any other, I guess you can continue. I think I cut you off in the middle. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, I was just going to say it really depends, how you kind of divide. You can always just add on KPIs and the metrics you would use to kind of expand on your answer. And also, that kind of ties into where you initially establish as a baseline, how you're approaching this case study. So in terms of another option, and I think you can talk about is the revenue. So if the goal is to generate more revenue, how would this solution, this new product would help generate revenue for the company? And then in this case, the revenue would be coming from the enterprise users So, once you have an initial offering as a bundle, it could really be split into an add-on later on, or, as Anoki mentioned, just don't have to dig really deep into different pricing strategies. Just like the pricing model, they would choose like subscription-based, user-based, or, like maybe you want to kind of like tap into value-based pricing model, which is a whole beast. So like a few other things to keep in mind you can talk about is, like the revenue and the metrics, how you would track the success of the product, which of course the PM would have to do, because at the end of the day, PMs are working toward the overall goal that the strategy has laid out, and product is just the medium to do so. And of course, to add that value to the users as well. So you want to like look from both the perspectives of like the enterprise, say the company you're working for, and also the users. So like matching both the value being delivered and the goal being met. So you can tie, like wrap up their solution, just, like wrap up your answer by kind of like addressing both of those two segments.
Awesome. That was great, Prashant. I think that wraps up your answer. So that was really good. I think we went through like pretty much one of the frameworks that Anoki talked about. And again, like I said before, it doesn't have to be like too strict to a framework, as long as you cover like that thought process. I think that's the most valuable thing. But yeah, thanks, Kushang, for that awesome answer. Hopefully you guys found value from it. And now we'll just go to open Q&A basically. And Anoki, if you want to jump in with thoughts on like how overall that interview went, that would be good.
We did have some remaining questions that were left unanswered from before. So while you guys are coming up with your questions, I'll go over the previous ones. So there was one from Simran that said, she said, when preparing for PM interviews, what was the biggest challenge you faced and how did you overcome it? I think that was for Anoki when Anoki was doing your presentation. So if you could go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, sure. I would say there's many challenges that comes with interviewing. I'd say the biggest one though for me, and it never really goes away for me. I think it depends on like the role you're interviewing for and who you're meeting and the opportunity that it is for you. But one that I often struggle with, and I'm sure you, by the function of what questions I'm seeing in this chat, might also be something you guys are facing. It's just, you can't study everything and you don't know everything under the sun. And there's so many types of product interviews and so many types of questions and so many types of answers and so many types of frameworks and how to answer them. And I think the problem that I faced the most was it was overwhelming, because the internet, as resourceful as it is, it's also daunting because there's tons of stuff out there and you're like, I don't know, there's so many answers to this. And like, if the title of that YouTube video says best possible answer, then it must be. And I think that's the daunting part, is like, you don't know what may come at you when you're in the interview and if you've studied it. And I'd say the part that I still use, it never really is something that you can't know everything when you go into an interview, but it's certainly you can prepare for, is have what you're comfortable with as like your top 3 and stick with them. For me, that meant I had like top 3 workplace scenarios slash when I was first starting out into the workforce, school curricular scenarios that I always would have as my go-to examples that I can pivot to whatever skill was being questioned. So for example, I would have like a team-based scenario and I could make it into how I actually inspired my team to deliver an outcome that was challenging, but I could also talk about that same scenario with how I faced conflict with a particular team member in that team scenario. So changing the answer, but having the same example always made me feel at ease, because I'm like, I know the answer, I just need to position it a certain way, because you faced multiple areas of expertise in that one scenario. So noting down, like writing down in a Google Doc, like, okay, I'm gonna, for all critical thinking questions about a framework, I'm gonna use these examples and these projects I worked on. If it's gonna be more behavioral, then I'm gonna use these scenarios, and like, this is what I'm gonna fall back on. And just having that back of mind prepared made like all the internet examples less daunting, because you don't have to like think about like a textbook answer or something I saw online and that's why I'm going to use that framework. I'd say that was the most challenging. And now I just fall back to like 5 or 7 things that I always have top of mind, and I use them as like a cycle of different types of examples.
Awesome. Anoki, I think you got cut off, but like we would want to get some like general feedback as well on the interview. So go for it.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say that's a really great example for a product design question. In terms of answer, there's many different frameworks that you can use. You can also not use a framework, but I did see a particular comment in the comment section that I thought was very interesting, and that's some of the Google's, Facebook's, Amazon's look for frameworks. I would say the answer to that is yes and no. Depending on the role you are interviewing for, particularly if it's more junior than senior. Senior, for sure, they're going to look for frameworks 100%. They're going to challenge you on those frameworks. But I'd say when you're first breaking into product management, the thing that they look for is how can you think on your feet and how do you get to answers and what's your logic? And if you have good examples of how you justify why you are confident about an answer, oftentimes people will give you the benefit of the doubt that you'll figure it out and that they're going to give you like the token of appreciation that you're going to come on board and like you're going to proactively figure out answers to questions. I know frustrating for me when I was breaking into product was just like you don't have product experience until you are a product manager, and so it's harder to have specific product frameworks when you're first trying to break into the role and the first internship and things like that. So using projects and timelines and deliverables as like your pseudo products is also a great way to go about it. So I'd say for this example, I think we did a good job of walking through like designing an experience using your thoughts, and that is just as valid, and how you converse about those thoughts is just as valid if you don't have like a framework to leverage.
Awesome. Thanks for that feedback.
And then, okay, we'll continue with our remaining questions. So there was a question from Michael earlier. It was for Noki. Said, hey Noki, so he said, coming from a non-technical background, how did you leverage the fact that you did come from a non-technical background during interviews and applications?
Yeah, I prepped with technical folks for sure. I highly suggest it. I think for somebody who did not speak technical lingo before going into the workplace, 2 things helped me. Number one is I worked very heavily with engineers, even in non-product roles. And I also started to learn how to code myself in my earlier days in rotational programs. And if you have the opportunity to learn how to code, and there's many languages and many things that you can dive into, the easiest thing for me to get into was SQL coding. And it's not something that you have to know. By no means am I doing it every day anymore. But it certainly helped me understand the challenges that engineering folks face, and oftentimes coming from a non-technical background, when you come from an outsider lens, questioning like data and why certain things take a longer time to process or upload or transact, I think you get a better appreciation for it. So I would say working with data engineers where you can, and when you aren't right now, I actually went through potential technical questions. I would Google them for the company I was interviewing for. And then I have engineering friends, and I would actually practice with them. And I would say, what would your answer be if I asked you this as a product manager? Why would you recommend this tech stack? What are the realities of the languages that are being used in this tech stack? Why are they those realities? Things I can't find on the internet. What's your opinion about JavaScript? What's your opinion about this front-end React framework? What's your opinion about how long it takes iOS to develop this versus native for this? So figuring out what to ask your engineers, and then how to ask it, and getting an engineering person to actually walk you through it to prep for an interview is completely okay. And then also there are technical questions that you may not know the answer to. I've faced this in a technical interview a few years ago, and the interviewer appreciated when I said, I actually don't know the answer to that, but I can talk to engineering. I would specifically talk to this engineer, mobile, iOS, for this reason. And this is what I would ask him, and I'll get back to you. And they were very appreciative of just like being honest. That's also okay.
Thank you for the answer. That was great. Just one last one we had from before from Samantha. How did you know PM was right for you? And this could both Anoki and Kushank, you guys can touch on that if you like.
I'll pass it to Kushank. I feel like I'm mic hoarding.
Kushank, you can unmute yourself and answer the question if you'd like.
Sorry.
Oh, I'll repeat the question.
Okay, I was
no
saying,
worries.
so like, growing up like in an Indian, society. Are we good now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I grew up in India, right? So it's just kind of like given that I have to start with engineering. Of course, I like technology, so I started off with an engineering degree. While in my degree, like I just always knew that I don't want to be like, I just always felt like I was like more like a generalist rather than like a specialist. I had way too many interests. I could never like stick to one thing. I always wanted to try a bunch of different things. So I decided, okay, I'm not gonna be like a software developer for the rest of my life. I just need to try something else. So I got my first internship as a project manager at SAP. So I got to try like, a bit of project management. And then I was like, okay, this is not something I wanted. So I tried to look for a different role. And I thought consulting might be the role for me. So I tried to like do that technology consulting for Richmond Hospital. And then while I was in that project, I was like, okay, so working with clients in external projects, or just working with projects is good in that capacity as a consultant, or like providing that, like being the creative and like, driving the strategy and all that stuff. But that's not the industry I'm in. So like, then I kind of moved into software, back to software. And I was like, okay, this is great. I get to kind of like work with different technologies. I get to work kind of like drive the strategy, being the decision owner, and of course, taking the responsibility for all the failures and credit for the success. That's great. I love that. But I guess just to kind of like boil down and summarize like how I figured it out, just trying different things. It's funny because people say you should try different things. Yeah, sometimes people are afraid because on a resume it feels like weird. You've been jumping around a lot. But yeah, another way is to like just do your own projects. Last year, like I built a web app. I launched it. Just kind of like going through the entire mindset of product manager. And now I'm working like on another consultancy project of my own. So I would say just take initiatives, talk to a lot of people, and try a bunch of things, so you'll know what would be like the better fit for you. Now, it's not something you would just get an answer to. You'll have to kind of like do a process of elimination, at least from my case.
Thank you for your answer. It was
Okay.
really well said. Yeah.
Great. Okay. We have another question from Simran for Kushank. The question is, what have you found is the difference between project versus product manager, aside from the scale, since a project can consist of many products?
So I'd say a product and project manager, like management, are two completely different things. So if you're project manager, you're responsible for the delivery. But if you're product manager, you're responsible for the deliverable. I think that's one way to put it, I suppose. Like as a project manager, I mean, typically you wouldn't really see project manager in a software companies anymore. They used to be, but now they turn into like Scrum Masters or whatnot. But for like non-software development projects, they're project management. Again, it just kind of goes to like they're more for like the delivery, and then product is for like deliverable. You're responsible for interacting with the users, like with the stakeholders, really identifying what are the needs, what customers want, how to iterate, and then working with the engineering teams to get it done. As a project manager, you're working with like, okay, this is the budget approval, this is the rate logs. Okay, how can we mitigate these risks, and how can we get this project delivered on time and on schedule?
Yep, thank you so much for that reply. I think we'll cut off our Q&A here. So I'll pass it on to Ratcha for the closing. And thank you both so much for your amazing presentation, mock interview, and all these responses. And okay, to Ratchet.
Thanks, Judy. Trisha, if you want to quickly share the screen for the slides again. Awesome. So yeah, thanks Kushank and Anoki for that awesome, presentations, discussion. I think it was very interactive, which was really good to see. So yeah, I think as a club, we have put together so like Anoki mentioned, when I was also preparing for my PM interviews, when I was preparing for my PM internship interviews, personally, like I felt really overwhelmed with the amount of resources available online. And it's like you have cracking the PM interview, you have Exponent, you have so many different new websites coming up, and like there's so many different frameworks out there, and it's really hard to kind of like, I guess, coming into product as a new person without any background about product management could be intimidating, and that's part of the reason why we started this community. So that, yeah, we're just here to kind of like help you leverage like people who have gone through this before, and such as Anoki and Kushank, as well as some people in our community who are students and have gone through this before. So as a club, we've put together some resources. It's basically like a summary of what has helped us personally the most, and just kind of like it's a little less intimidating than maybe like searching online. So yeah, feel free to take a look at that. We also have a Slack channel that helps you schedule mock interviews with each other. So if you guys are interested in that or preparing for interviews, feel free to just post a message there, and you can schedule something with the community. There's a lot of people who are interested in PM interviews, and you guys can like use this as an opportunity to practice the things you have learned today, because I think something that has helped me personally as well is doing lots of mock interviews, and I think it's really important to just keep that practice so you get in that PM mindset by during your interview. But yeah, I think that's it for my little spiel. Hopefully you guys find that helpful, and if you have any feedback, um, we would we would really appreciate if you could fill out a quick form. It should take about 2 minutes of your time. We also have a feedback channel on Slack. So if you just want to add yourself to that, it's just feedback. You can just comment or like write anything you want. And, we would love to obviously, as a PM club, we kind of think about this community as a product as well. And we really, really love listening to your guys' opinions and how we can add the most value to your PM journey. So like, feel free to put some feedback there, and we'll definitely figure out a way to incorporate that into future events or future initiatives. But anyways, thanks everyone for attending. This video will be available on our YouTube channel. So we will share the link to that in our Slack community as well as on social media. So anyways, thanks so much guys for attending. We really appreciate you taking out the time, and have a great rest of your evening/day, depending on where you are.